Yeah, he saw that they'd go across, but then they'd have like another one. They would come, and then it would pass the other one, or then one would come and then it'd pass it, and then it would get passed again. And so they made their little models, which they'd had for a long time. They'd always had little celestial models. And so they recreated it. They had the sun with all the other planets going around. And so if one planet was going faster around like this and the other one was like that, then that's what it would look like to us. And he said, oh, you know what? We're just another one of those planets. We're going around the sun. So he tried to tell that to the Pope, who was his friend, who was Galileo's friend. But the Pope wasn't having none of it, because the Christians had always believed that the Earth was the center of the universe. Because that's what Aristotle said. That's what they always thought. And if they had to admit that they were wrong, then they could lose their power. If they could be wrong about that, they could be wrong about everything. And I think around those times, that's when they invented papal infallibility. In one of those councils, they were like, let's make a new decree that says the Pope can never be wrong. There we go. But yeah, Galileo was like, oh, no, oh, okay, you don't want to. Because they had burnt a lot of people at the stake, the Catholic Church had. You know, like in the Spanish Inquisition, they burned a whole bunch of people at the stake. Bloody Mary burnt like 280 people at the stake for not being Catholic. The Catholic Church had burnt, I don't know if they burnt Copernicus, Giordano Bruno. They had burnt some scientists who were trying to espouse that scientific stuff at the stake already for heresy, for going against what the church says. I mean, Catholic Church is very evil. I mean, yeah, they're good if you want to say all the good stuff, but if you only wanted to focus on the evil, the most evil institution ever to exist is the Catholic Church. They were doing, I mean, if you just look at all the burnings of the stakes and stuff, and also all the control that they had, like, in a lot of countries, people weren't allowed to not go to church on Sunday. Like, they had to work 6 days a week. And then when Sunday came around, they couldn't hang out at their place. They had to go to church. Slaves. And of course, with serfdom, they were slaves. They couldn't leave their the land of the Lord's manor. People told them who to marry, all this stuff. But you weren't allowed to believe what you wanted to believe. And if you did, and if you wrote a book about something that the Catholic Church didn't agree with, then you'd get burned at the stake. And so a lot of people did that. So Galileo was like, okay, forget about it then. I don't want to die. So they didn't burn him at the stake. But he did, but I think they condemned him, and they condemned him to hell or something, and they actually didn't open up the gates to heaven and allow him to go into heaven until like 1996 or something like that. It was only like 15 years ago. Where they're finally like, okay, we forgive Galileo. Yeah, but then there was some other ones who they finally figured out that the world was around and going around the sun, and then the Catholic Church adopted that. But it caused a lot of confusion amongst normal people, because they were like, the world isn't perfect. So they started to question divine power. And also divine, like, they had this idea of divine providence, like however the world was, that's how it is supposed to be. And that's how Jesus and God wants it, so don't fight it, just let it be. And I think that was a positive way to view things back in those days, because it would deter people from always trying to depose each other. People try to depose the local lord, or the local lord trying to depose the king and stuff, by thinking that, oh, he shouldn't be king because he doesn't deserve it. But now they have the idea, oh, it's divine right. It's his. God wants it. He's the king because God wants it, and leave it alone. And it's kind of, I think that part of it comes from Jesus. Like, just let it be. However it is, that's how it should be. It's the Dharma. It's the way. He's the king. The law says he's the king. He's the son of the king. Just let it be. That's how it should be. Live your life. Turn the other cheek. It's the way God wants. However the world is the way God wants. So I think that was good, but they kind of let that run out of hand, and they just thought that everything was the way God wants, and so don't question anything, and if you do, you'll get burnt at the stake. Even like, that's why they follow the Bible to a T, and they can't think for themselves. I was even talking to a fundamentalist Christian a couple years ago, and I was like, yeah, but the Bible isn't the only book that you should read. There's other books. And he's like, and what about the Apocrypha? And he's like, oh, but the Bible is the Bible because God set it forth that way, and however it is, that's the way it should be. So don't question it, like divine right. But yeah, so by then people were starting to question it. They were like, wait, the Catholic Church was wrong about the world going around the sun. Now the world is it's like the moon is just a rock, and we're just float. Those moons going around Jupiter, yeah, we're all just floating around the sun. We're nothing. We're just off on a speck. Maybe God doesn't even know us. And so then, and then you had back in like 1700s, there was Newton. Galileo actually made some other interesting discoveries. See this, they had like their number one scientist from Aristotle to Galileo was Aristotle. So for 2,000 years they had one scientist, and finally Galileo comes around, and he realizes that that everything falls at the same pace. Before they thought that bigger things fell faster than smaller things, because he was like, had more of you and things fall. Okay, but anyways, then you had Newton, and Newton was the big changer for the scientific revolution. He's like up there he's neck and neck with Einstein as far as changing the paradigm of what we think about stuff, and being like a great mind, because Newton invented math. He invented calculus. He figured out that he actually did mathematical equations to figure out that the Earth, that all the planets in the sky are actually falling towards the Earth. He figured out what gravity was. That's where that saying, the apple falling on his tree. He was sitting under a tree, and then the apple fell. So he was like, what? The apple was up in the tree? It must have fallen because it wanted to fall. So he picked up the apple, and he let go of the apple. And he's like, if I let go of the apple, is it going to fall on the ground? He let go of the apple, and it fell. And he said, then this is gravity. I invented gravity. So he invented gravity. But, but he actually turned it into a mathematical equation. And he looked up in the sky, and he said, oh, but yes, all of those things in the sky, they're actually falling to us with gravity. The moon is falling to the Earth right now with gravity. And the Earth is falling into the sun with gravity. And the only thing that's that's making it spin around and not actually get closer to us is its motion. It's momentum. The momentum that it uses to centrifugal force that it uses to go around is actually pushing it away, but gravity is keeping it close, so it's just locking it in lockstep. But he created, and then he figured out what light was. Before that, people thought that light was invented inside of your eyes, but he saw that playing with prisms, that light was just, it all came from white light, and it was just this split up of different wavelengths that came from the sky. So, and I don't know that much about Newton, but what he did basically was he mechanized the way that the universe works, and it was no longer something that was perfect and unchanging in the will of God's, pulling the hands and everything of some divine alive being in the sky deciding what he wants. But it was just a natural it was like something that you could put your finger around, wrap your mind around, like a mechanism that you could predict how it was going to go. And so that was the invention of science. And look where science got us to invent all this stuff, where people actually they don't explain something as I don't have any good examples. But that's when they basically started doing experiments, figuring out how stuff happened from experiments, and not just thinking that that just is, because that's how it is. They opened up bodies, and they looked at the heart and found out that the heart was a pump. It actually pumped blood. Before that, I think Galen was the guy who thought that the heart was just a filter of the blood. But the heart's actually a pumper of the blood. And so we're just a machine, and everything's a machine. So that's when people started to get really atheistic and said, oh, maybe there is no God. And it's all just dead, and we're all just mechanisms, lifeless organisms. When we die, we won't, we're gone. There is no heaven, because the Catholic Church is wrong about these other things. They're wrong about heaven too. So there is no heaven. There's no anything up there. It's just mechanism, a dead mechanism. But one thing that people should realize is that Newton, the super genius who invented calculus and was able to explain the law of gravity, and I think he even came up with the law of exponentiality of gravity, or quadratic exponentiality of gravity. How that if something gets twice as close, it gets twice as more powerful, the gravity does. So he could explain how something could float once it gets past 60 miles up in the sky, and once it falls in, it falls, and light, and anyways, all that other stuff. Newton was an alchemist though as well, and alchemy is basically chemistry from before the days when they knew that they knew what chemicals were. People had always been interested in like making tinctures and stuff to try to figure out how to counterfeit coins and try to make gold to get rich that way. And but they didn't actually understand how it all worked. They did actually, the Greeks back in a long time ago. One of those Greek philosophers, he came up with the idea of the atom. He said that the atom was an indivisible part that couldn't be divided anymore, and stuff would divide because they realized that that plants grow out of the sun, grow out of the rays of the sun and water and dirt. And then you eat that, and then you poop it out, and then animals eat that, and then they grow up, and then they poop it out, and then you eat the animal. So they knew that there were these particles that were getting recycled and recirculated, like law of conservation of like matter and energy. And so they said, yeah, well, if you divide up, whatever makes up your teeth, or whatever makes up, it all comes down to one indivisible part, and then you piece those together in a certain configuration, in the same thing, and that's what would create something. So they did have the idea of the atom and stuff in those days, but they didn't really understand the elements and understand it all that well. So they that's what they were. They were just called the alchemists, the chemists of the day. But that's what Newton was. But Newton, he was doing experiments with minerals, and he was growing minerals in his flasks too, which you can do. You can pour like different minerals together, and then you can see like little crystals grow. Little kids buy that. You can buy that at the store, where you can get like crystal growing kits and see the crystal grow. And he saw the crystal as as just another plant. And so he wrote that that the crystals were alive, and they were another form of life form, and that the earth was alive, and that the earth grew out from the center of the earth and grew, and that's how like, I think he may even believe that the earth was growing. That's where like volcanoes come from, and that's where all the movement, because everything's alive. And so he believed that there was a higher order and that it was all alive. He believed in God. He was religious and believed in God. And we don't realize that. All the like atheistic scientists today, they leave that out. They sweep that under the rug. But and same thing with Darwin. Darwin was the dude who came up with evolution. Like 100 years after Newton? That he was the first dude who realized that not all of the animals had been around since the beginning of time, like how Aristotle said. But you know what? Aristotle was right. All of the animals have been around since the beginning of time and are unchanging and eternal. If you look at it in the big picture, if you look at it in all of the planets and all the parallel universes in history in existence under God in the universe, there's always a pterodactyl. There's always going to be a pterodactyl somewhere, because it's an animal that incorporates a certain set of circumstances in a certain world. And a pterodactyl may go extinct on this planet, but that form is always going to exist somewhere else. And so Aristotle was right. All of the animals and everything, they are all unceasing and changing. But, Darwin is right too, in that animals, as the world changes, animals' bodies change to adapt to the world, and it is the survival of the fittest. Like, there are random mutations of certain, this new kind of chipmunk is born with a new kind of claw that's better for a new kind of tree that's up. So then those chipmunks survive and the other ones die. And so that's how it happens, and that's how we evolve, and it's right. So everybody's right, but they came up with that idea, and they realized they learned about evolution. And but the atheists took that too far and said, "Oh yes, evolution." They didn't realize that about all the other planets out there. So, and also that it doesn't have to be random. The mutations don't have to be random. They could be. It's perfectly like DNA mutations that could be a spark from an imagination within the greater mind of chipmunk world, chipmunk gods, chipmunk souls. Could be, oh look, that new tree. Well, let's mutate the gene in here to make a sharper claw. And then it happens. If you look at the body, our cells, our DNA is our like sicknesses that we have. They have proven that placebos work, but sicknesses can come from the way that sicknesses and signals are transmitted through the cells and stuff are basically through shapes that they just fit in a certain shape on the edge of the cell, and then that shape is connected to here, and then it moves over to the center of the DNA. And so it's... Anyways, I'm sorry, I can't explain that right now, but our mind can affect... Well, actually, I don't even have to explain it. It's really simple. Our mind can affect how our bodies feel. You can activate your adrenal glands by getting excited, and then you see goosebumps all over yourself. And but those signals are actual mechanical signals. Like brain surgeons, they attach certain diodes to your brain, and a certain part of your brain can let your hand move up. So we are a body, and so I think that confused a lot of people when they started doing that, like 100 years ago. Like, they get the frog and the frog was dead, and then they attach a diode to its leg, and the leg would move, and they go, what? I thought the frog was dead though, but now this electricity. So what, is electricity alive? And I think the modern atheistic world is just reactionary against the idea that the world is alive. It's like Christians and Catholics had believed, and the Greeks, whatever you believe, it's all right. Like the Greeks believing that animals are always there and never change, or that everything's created from the Platonic solids. All that's right. It's just that you can collaborate those things together. It's called syncretism. You just synchronize it all, and nobody would have an idea about something if it wasn't true. And you're only wrong, and I've said this in a bunch of videos, you're only wrong if you just start blatantly disbelieving other people, and everything that they say. It's better to just disagree with that of what they're saying that they disagree with, but not just disagree with it all outright. Yeah, but it's just good to realize that Newton, the great scientist, he was actually thought that the world was alive. And anyways, I guess that brings us up to where we are now. Is us today. You have all these different groups. You have the people who think that everything's dead and it's just a mechanism, and then you have those other people over here who think that the world was created in 6 days by God all at once, boom, and that Jesus is the only Son of God, and they're both wrong. Then you got the New Agers in the middle, who believe everything, who believe that everything's alive, but it does work in rules. It does work like a mechanism, but it's an alive mechanism. And it is controlled by God. It is controlled by a higher mind, kind of like how the Greeks said. The vision of them coming down and creating this world that doesn't really last long. And there's always constant state of flux, and yeah, everybody can be right. The atheists are wrong because they just tell you that they believe that everything else is dead. But they don't have to believe that. They can just not know. Anyways, well, I think I've gone on long enough, though. Okay, hope I made sense. My brain's not working. I can't concentrate so well when I can't hear